drought and grasshoppers showed up to take over the dry land farming. It began to be just a hell of a situation, my father always said of those years when he and my mother were trying to get a start in life. Any place you looked, you saw people who had put 20 years into this country, and all they had to show for it was a pile of old calendars. Then when drought circled back again at the start of the 30s and joined forces with Herbert Hoover, bad progressed to worse. That is within my own remembering, those dry, bitter years. Autumn upon autumn, the exodus stories kept coming out of the high-line grain country to the north and east of us, and right down here on the highway which runs through the town of Grovon, anybody who looked could see for himself the truth of those tales. The furniture-loaded jitney trucks with farewells to Montana painted across their boxboards in big crooked letters. Goodbye, old dry, and as for have her, you can have her. The two country did have the saving grace that the price for lambs and wool recovered somewhat, while other livestock and crops stayed sunk. But anybody on two land who didn't scrape through the early 30s with sheep likely didn't scrape through at all. Cattle rancher after cattle rancher and farmer after farmer got in deep with the banks. Gang plow and ditcher, workhorses and harness, hay mow and cream separator. Everything on those places was mortgaged except the air, and then foreclosure and the auctioneer's hammer. At those hammer sales we saw men weep, women as stricken as if they were looking on death, and their children bewildered. So it was time hope showed up. Jick, set your mouth for it. Supper, and my mother. It is indelible in me that all this began there right at the very outset of June, because I was working over my saddle and lengthening the stirrups again to account for how much I was growing that year, for the ride up with my father on the counting trip the next morning. I can even safely say what the weather was, one of those brockled late afternoons under the Rockies when tag ends of storm cling in the mountains and sun is reaching through wherever it can between the cloud piles. Tell me why it is that details like that, saddle stirrups a notch longer or sunshine dabbed around on the foothills some certain way, seem to be the allowance of memory while the bigger points of life hang back. At least I have found it so, particularly now that I am at the time where I try to think what my life might have been like had I not been born in the two-medicine country and into the McCaskill family. Oh, I know what's said. How home-ground and kin together lay their touch along us as unalterably as the banks of a stream direct its water. But that doesn't mean you can't wonder whether substantially the same person would meet you in the mirror if your birth certificate didn't read as it does, or whether some other place of growing up might have turned you wiser or dumber, more contented or less. Here in my own instance, some mornings I will catch myself with a full cup of coffee yet in my hand, gone cold while I have sat here stewing about whether my 70 years would be pretty much as they are by now, had I happened into existence in, say, China or California instead of northern Montana. Any of this, of course, goes against what my mother forever tried to tell the other three of us, that the past is a taker, not a giver. It was a warning she felt she had to put out in that particular tone of voice with punctuation all through it, fairly often in our family. When we could start hearing her commas and capital letters, we knew the topic had become facing facts, not going around with our heads stuck in yesterday. Provocation for it, I will say, came from my father as reliably as a dusk wind out of a canyon. Half a night at a time he might spend listening to Tucson Rennie tell of the roundup of 1882, when the cowmen fanned their crews north from the elbow of the Teton River to the Canadian line and brought in 100,000 head. Or the tale even bigger and earlier than that, the last great buffalo hunt. Tucson having ridden up into the Sweetgrass Hills to see down onto a prairie that looked burnt, so dark with buffalo, the herd pinned into place by the Plains tribes. Strange, but I can still recite the tribes and where they pitched their camps to surround those miles of buffalo, just as Tucson passed the lore of it to my father. Crows on the southeast, Grovon and Assiniboines on the northeast, Piegans on the west, Crees along